All right, so hello everyone, good morning again. Welcome to yet another video. In this video, we'll be looking at our weekly market outlook, piggybacking off of news that we had last week as a release. Negative news, NFP news for the dollar, hence the weakening of the dollar and a huge rally of a lot of the dollar pairs. Gold included went up more than 1,000 pips. Some made money, some lost money. A lot of gold sellers were trying to sell, but the news again came out negative for the dollar, hence the big rally. In this video, we'll dive right into our weekly outlook, just looking, obviously starting off with our fundamental calendar. Again, not too much happening this week. We do have some big CPI data coming out on Wednesday. For the rest of the week, nothing too crazy. So again, this video will rely more on a bit of technical analysis, but there is things that we can look out for that we're going to discuss as we proceed throughout the video. Two very interesting things that are currently ongoing is that Trump and Iran are negotiating, or the US and Iran are on the negotiating table. We'll get a bit more into exactly what the terms are and what they're asking for and how this could affect oil prices as we continue on through the new month. As of Monday today, nothing too crazy is going on. Some Bank of Japan news or summary of opinions, but nothing too crazy there. So a lot of very slow Monday. As always, nothing too interesting to look out for. Tuesday is a bank holiday for Bank of Japan, so they'll be out of office tomorrow. News that might affect the Aussie dollar is a monetary policy statement from the RBA. That's tomorrow 7:30 a.m. So by the time Asia session is done, we do expect a lot of volatility tomorrow on things like AUD JPY. AUD might also be affected here. Let's see how price affects the Aussie dollar for tomorrow. The rest of the day, nothing too crazy to look out for. On Wednesday is our big day for us USD pair lovers. We do have CPI month on month, year on year coming out tomorrow. And again, CPI, just for a refresher for anyone who's new here, is the change in price of goods and services purchased by consumers, excluding food and energy. Basically, what this is tracking is inflation. Have prices of goods gone up or down? Directly correlating or affecting consumer purchasing power. And with that said, because we have seen that NFP news or employment news last week came out negative, meaning less people had jobs. So a lot of people lost their jobs. That means there's not much money out there to be spent. Hence, CPI data might try to come up and sort of cancel the effects of last week, but we'll have to wait and see on what exactly it is the numbers tell us, because that can also give us a direction into where prices are headed through the rest of the month. As of the last time, we're at 2.6% from the previous. Our forecast is about 2.5, so just slightly less at about 0.1. We'll be waiting to see what exactly is happening there. Stay tuned. We'll give an update on CPI on Wednesday. Thursday, the British pound is going to have some news releases. GDP month on month. We're looking to see whether we are actually going to hit a forecast of negative 0.1%, which is a bit negative from what we had the previous time at 0.1 positive. So again, GDP is the change in total value of all goods and services. Actual greater than the forecast is good for the currency. This is just a metric that's showing us the health of the country. So we'll be waiting to see how that news comes out. On the rest of the day, we have PPI coming out, which is also an inflationary measure. So this is a change in price of finished goods and services sold by producers. Actual greater than the forecast is good for the dollar. So we'll be hoping for a positive PPI news release, as we're looking for a slightly negative CPI release at about not 0.1 at 0.1%, decrease from a 2.6 to a 2.5. PPI then, we're looking to balance that out with maybe a positive PPI release of not 2% against the previous negative 0.3, just to potentially correct some of the moves that will have happened. But again, We don't know how this news is going to come out, so we'll have to wait and see what Thursday moves look like. But again, PPI news, another inflationary measure of the economy, so we'll be waiting to see what results come out of there. I know the Reserve is definitely trying to curb inflation in all ways possible. On Friday, again, a bit of a quiet day. We do have retail sales coming out at 3:30 p.m. just around New York open. All the way at 5 p.m. we also have preliminary consumer sentiment at 5 p.m. That's smack in the middle of our New York AM session here. So we'll be seeing how price action will be playing out throughout Friday. So like I touched on earlier, again, the US and Iran are on the negotiating table, trying to find an amicable, agreement that is maybe a win-win for both parties. Who knows? So again, the oil price stream, losses on delayed US-Iran deal. It has been delayed and it is taking some time. So Iran is willing to give them a listening ear, and oil prices fell on hopes of US-Iran deal and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But losses got trimmed as the expected agreement failed to materialize. The lack of US attacks on Iran still remains a positive signal, with likely limiting further oil price gains unless tensions escalate. Oil currently is trading at about $78 per barrel, which is quite high. So we'll be looking at the technicals of it just to see what exactly this would look like in terms of if that deal comes through, and if it doesn't, then what exactly might end up happening if we still have the Strait of Hormuz closed. From a technical point of view, looking at our charts here on the daily time frame, again, we can see that oil is at around 78.80 actually dollars per barrel, with a nice push to the upside into this resistance points around the 80 zone, 80 to 81 zone right there. We can see that price has come down to this point before and then reacted to the upside. Then we broke this to the downside with a nice big gap right there. Then price came back up and filled that gap, and then we had a push to the downside as potentially the news was coming out that Iran and Trump are on the negotiating table. But again, as of today, because of that delayed agreement, we can see that slight bullish pressure is slowly creeping into the market, potentially wanting to break above this support level right here. This immediate support, if it was to break that immediate support, then maybe from a technical perspective, we can now start looking for potential buy continuations to the upside, maybe targeting these 92 levels before that deal is struck. After the deal is struck, then maybe we can now start looking for some sort of corrections to the downside, maybe coming back to equilibrium or fair market price in terms of oil prices. More news still out as well. We've seen that we do have some European news coming out this week. But what we are seeing here is that the Euro area investor confidence has surged quite significantly to positive territory in August, as we have just started the month. So again, the recovery continues, with the latest gauge of investor morale being the highest since February early this year. We can see that August Centix investor confidence at 0.9 on a positive against the negative 0.5, which was the expected forecast, and the prior was a negative 3.1. So it's a big jump in the right direction. This is the highest since February, and also the expectations index did go up to 10.3, which is also the highest since February. Both the current situation and expectations index have risen for a fourth consecutive month, showing very bullish signs for the Eurozone investor confidence. Right, fundamentally, I think we're done for the week. Again, nothing too crazy. We'll just be on the lookout for CPI, which comes out on Wednesday. Have your alerts on for that. Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. That is New York open. And we'll be seeing what exactly the data tells us. Okay, so we can see that the dollar index had a nice big rally to the upside. Once the news came out last week, had a nice big rally to the upside into the close of July. As we came into the new month, we can see that last week, that Fed news came out and employment data from NFP was negative for the dollar, hence that big push to the downside. Very, very crazy push to the downside, breaking all these previous levels of support and coming all the way down to this 99.4 regional zone, which is a nice support zone. Found some support there, reacted off of that zone, and currently we're just seated on that support level, waiting to see how price does react off of this area. But again, with this said, this is the weakening of the dollar. So then if we were to look for continuations, I'd be looking to see where the price will come back to maybe this zones right here, and then I'd be selling off of that zone. If not, maybe get a nice break and continuation to the downside with the weakening of the dollar as we progress through the week. But currently we are seated in a nice compression area. Nice compression area where we're just moving sideways with nothing too drastic in terms of dollar movements. We have a range here between this channel around the 100 and the 99.5 zone where price is sitting pretty. We do have this intraday reaction zone or rejection zone that price has reacted off of and pushed to the downside, but nothing too crazy. No clear signs that we are continuing with a weakening of the dollar. If we move on to a 1 hour, we can see that zone right there. So then going into New York PM, we'd love to see either continuations targeting these lows or nice reactions all the way to the upside, targeting those 100 levels as a mean reversion. That would be a nice trade. Let's wait and see what price has in store for us as we continue on throughout the day. I'll be moving on to the euro just to see what the euro has been doing from our daily time frame. Again, we did see this is Wednesday. From Wednesday's price action here, we've had some nice pushes to the upside, and then coming into news release, this is currently where we're at on that daily time frame. We've come and hit a nice level of support, an area that gave us a nice break of structure on the internal to the downside. Then price now started consolidating throughout the past 2 weeks. Then we've had a nice mean reversion all the way to that price that gave us the first initial push to the downside. We are anticipating some rejections. We've already seen that very fast rejection. From an intraday perspective, again, this is that big push to the upside on Friday on NFP release. We can see a nice big bearish, nice big green bullish candle pushing above this resistance areas are above that 1.15. We've had a nice pullback to the 50% of that range. We'd love to see maybe a continuation coming to take out these highs from an intraday perspective, especially before Wednesday a news release. This would be a nice target, and then maybe that release gives us a positive dollar that pushes this price all the way now down to the 1.15, giving us maybe indications that now the sellers have stepped in from a technical perspective, and we'd be targeting these lows down here before we start looking for any continuations to the upside. But that would be the nice play out of price action that I would be looking for as we progress into the week. Let's see what happens as we continue. For GU, we've seen a nice continuation rally to the upside. Again, negative NFP news from last week, giving us this big push to the upside into that resistance zone at 1.351. We had a nice reaction where sellers stepped in. However, sellers were not strong enough to push price all the way down. We came back to maybe the 75% of this big leg or range right there. Price then reacted off of that 1.348 area with buyers stepping in and pushing price to the upside. We can see that they did push above this particular resistance zone. Nice big aggressive candle to the upside, getting us to the 1.352. Again, I have my zone there at 1.35400, where I'd love for price to come up before we actually get any resistance, and sellers stepping into the market to give us a nice pullback into that area, 1.35100. Again, I'd love to see this target taken out, 1.1356 as the extreme high, potentially as price continues on to the upside. Again, we have our eyes and ears out for CPI on Wednesday, so we'd love to catch these moves just before CPI news release. That's on Wednesday, New York session or New York open, and then catch more moves right after that news release on Wednesday. Aussie dollar, we do have some news tomorrow morning around 7:30. That's just before Frankfurt opens. So we'd be looking for some interesting price action throughout Asia session tonight, maybe a consolidation before the news release happens. But what we can see from last week is a beautiful push in prices to the upside. We can see that nice solid market structure that's pushing prices all the way up. This was our target for the weekly at 0.7800. That zone right there, we can see that price is currently at that zone and is reacting off of the area. We can see sellers wanting to step into the market, but nothing too crazy in terms of selling pressure that is pushing us aggressively to the downside. We can see that there is a big battle between the buyers and the sellers, and that is currently what's going on. I am not surprised to be seeing that type of price action today. Again, throughout Asia session, I wouldn't be surprised to be seeing the markets potentially just ranging for Aussie dollar before tomorrow morning's news release, which is high impact news that could push prices either to the downside or to the upside. According to the forecast, they're looking for a positive Aussie dollar, and that would be a good sign that would push prices all the way up above this resistance right here. Once we get above this resistance, then maybe we can start looking for those continuations to the upside. USD CAD again. USD CAD, we had a nice focus that we wanted to see price come back to test these areas before continuing on to the downside, and we did see a nice price reaction from this area right here. Price came back, mitigated that zone, and then pushed on to the downside with sellers stepping in aggressively again, fueled by the catalyst of the news release. Pushed price nicely to the downside, and that was a good sign for us to be looking for any other opportunities on USD CAD. I'd love to see whether my lower time frames would give me a nice shift to the upside before giving me confirmations that price wants to continue higher. Just because we have tapped into a previous support zone right there. So I'll be looking to see some reactions. I'll be on standby for that one, just to see some reactions and potentially catch some buys, maybe towards the equilibrium of that range, maybe targeting this 1.40600 zone before we now want to continue to the downside. Again, if the new catalyst coming out this week is negative for the dollar, then we can potentially want to see a deeper retracement into these deeper zones, these previous support zones at the 1.3600 levels. Dollar Swissy, again, we've been pushing slowly but steadily to the upside. With the nice push to the upside, we had an aggressive sell-off again with the weakening of the dollar on Friday that brought us back to that 0.85 zone and a nice corrective pullback, trying to attempt to push us towards the upside, maybe breaking above resistance, but we can see sellers stepping right into the market almost immediately, breaking that bullish momentum that the buyers had initially caught, and that is just leaving us around this range, around the 0.8100 and 0.8400 zone. With nothing really much to do. We just seem to be ranging around this area. What I'd love to see is for price to potentially take out some of these lows as liquidity and then push us all the way to the upside. This would be our targets at 0.81 and 0.82 as the extreme of this zone. That would be a great place to potentially now take some of our profits if we get tagged into any of these trades that would be pushing us to the upside. If price then still decides that it wants to continue lower, then coming down to 200 zone would be an interesting zone for us to look at on whether price can actually find its way to the downside, coming into some of these areas, maybe giving us those reactions to the upside, and then maybe continue to the downside if we get more negative news on the dollar. Would be a secondary trade that we could look out for. Again, Japanese yen has been a bit crazy. We did see a nice intervention by the Bank of Japan around this area, then a nice corrective push to the upside with slow but steady momentum. The buyers have been pushing price coming up, but again, the Japanese yen is trying to correct and still remain steady in comparison to the US dollar. So they would love to see some continuation in the weakening of the dollar, because that just helps with the pricing of it. We can see these big moves, big swings that it's been having in the past couple of months, particularly. So then Japanese yen came back all the way to the 155 price point, which is where our support area was, reacted right off of that support area, and then now we've been buying towards the upside. We'd be anticipating to see whether we can get all the way to that 161 price point or 161 zone before we actually now step in and get some more sells to the 155 area down here. That would be a great place to get some sells. If not, then the buyers just continue playing this nice slow but steady momentum to the upside, targeting now these previous highs at around 164 and taking those highs to continue on with price to the upside. As we continue throughout the week, we do have a bank holiday tomorrow for the Bank of Japan. So it will just be nothing too interesting to look out for there. My next most immediate thing to be watching is CPI news on Wednesday. See how that affects the Bank of Japan, how that affects USD JPY. Because then if we can go above these areas, then that would be a zone that I'd be looking to get involved in, maybe to look for that continuation of the buys all the way to the upside, maybe into this area to take out some of these highs, come into that area before we continue lower. If not, maybe hold on to some buys and continue with that nice push to the upside. GJ, looking at it from last week, that was our projection that we'd love to see price continue on upwards, and it has done exactly that. So this 214 price point here is where we're looking to potentially get a reaction off of that area. Again, Japanese bank holiday tomorrow, but we do have some British pound news coming out later in the week, and that should be of impact to this particular pair. Let me just see, where exactly is it? It comes out on, here we are, on Thursday morning. We have GDP news release. That should be a catalyst to push price either up or down, depending on the positivity or the negativity of that news release for that particular day. So Thursday would be a big day to look out for, especially for you GJ lovers out there. I'd love to see maybe price push on to the upside with a nice continuation. That could be one way, maybe targeting some of these highs around the 218, going maybe to the 219, 220 extremes would be a good entry for us, or a nice exit for us. And then if we decide to not push beyond this 214.5 price point and the sellers step in aggressively, then these lows would be my targets for the end of the week, again with the help of that catalyst being GDP release on Thursday. If we look at the NASDAQ, we're just going to look at the heat map today and see, here we are. Just looking at the NASDAQ, what we can see from here is we do have big tech that's doing quite well. Doing quite well in the wrong direction is exactly what I mean, with mega caps showing mixed intraday direction. There's big heavyweight drag from Apple. We can see Nvidia also struggling here at negative 1.98, facing a lot of selling pressure, while Microsoft in itself looks quite nice at 1.87 gain. In the green, Palantir as well at 3.85, which looks very superb. Google as well is still, pretty steady with a 0.7 in the negative, so nothing too drastic going on there. Just stable, and Meta at 1.76 gain for communication services, looking very good. So it looks like software infrastructure is what's kind of carrying the market today. Consumer electronics, Apple at negative 2.02 is not a good look for the markets. Consumer cyclical, Amazon at 1.23, SpaceX at 1.56, at least a positive right there in quite some time. They have been struggling quite a bit, but they're looking pretty solid. But again, the big drag comes here in the big tech with Nvidia at negative 1.97. Okay, so then from a technical perspective, we have been bullish on the NASDAQ in itself. From a technical perspective, we've been seeing some nice pushes to the upside coming off of this 27,000 zone. Once we tapped into this previous supply, into this previous support zone right there, then price just rallied onto the upside and we were on that bullish train, trying to ride prices all the way to the up and up. And we've currently hit a resistance area right here at the 30,000 zone, with buyers and sellers trying to struggle on whether to continue pushing prices to the upside or not. And we've seen that reaction coming here once, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times. The previous times price has come to that zone, it's failed to break out of that zone. So then again, it is anticipated that sellers would want to continue selling from this area. However, if we do get buyers coming in, then the buyers would want to push prices to the upside, maybe targeting the 31,000 zone. And if that happens, this is kind of the area I'd be interested in getting in, around 29,900 to try and catch those big moves to the upside and maybe target that 32,000 zone. We've seen NASDAQ pretty bullish, with our 6-month buyers stepping into the markets, pushing our prices all the way to around this 29 or 30,000 zone. Nice push to the upside. We did take out some of that liquidity that was sitting around this 28,000 area, and we have seen that nice reaction to the upside. Can that liquidity be enough to fuel prices all the way above these highs? Potentially it would be. We're just waiting for the signs that can show us that that bullish momentum wants to continue and we can ride on that wave as well. Looking at the NASDAQ, almost same thing. We did hit all-time highs pretty recently on the NASDAQ. Let's just look at the different sectors and how they're doing. Sorry, on the S&P 500. Let's just look at the big tech split is looking very mixed today from an intraday perspective, with a heavyweight drag again coming from consumer electronics at Apple with negative 2.12. Minor pullbacks, well, minor, it was minor, but it's not minor anymore at negative 1.3. 0.93 is Nvidia, and we can see offsetting all these losses with some gains is Microsoft at a positive 1.76. And Google, again, still quite steady at negative 0.07. Amazon also pushing us towards the upside at 1.64%, which is great. We do have some semiconductors under some serious pressure. Okay, so here we go. Negative 1.81, negative 1.39, negative 1.84, negative 3. It's not looking good. It's not looking good for any of these guys as of now, and they are pushing us to the downside massively. In terms of defensive rotation, defensive rotation, however, is active with the energy sector looking quite good, with ExxonMobil positive 3.31% and 3.37% upward for CVX. The financials also looking quite steady, with JP Morgan Chase at 0.38. Nothing too exciting there to look at. From a technical perspective, again, like I said, all-time highs for S&P 500, new all-time highs at 7,700, which is fantastic, with buyers stepping into the markets. We've seen coming off of this 7,000 zone, we've just been continuing onwards and upwards to around 7,500, 7,600, where we had some resistance or a base. Then a nice continuation of that rally to the upside with the end of the week, last week, and start of the new month has started off quite well with a push to the upside. What I'd be looking for is maybe potentially see price come back to this 75,500 zone, maybe balance out some of these imbalances, fill in some of these gaps, and then we can continue on up. However, we do know that price doesn't necessarily have to come all the way down here, so even a slight reaction would be an indication to potentially get in at a nice discount. But again, we still want to see from an intraday perspective, price give us signs that it wants to continue down for us to be involved, and then we'll have our nice exit points just before we hit some of the support areas if the week continues on well. Gold, we had been bearish for quite some time, coming off of maybe some of that. If we were to draw a trend line, and we had a nice squeeze of momentum at around this 4020 area, 4020 area showed to be a nice support zone, not allowing price to get on any further to the downside. And with that said, we had a nice breakout and a push to the upside. This is an area where more buyers came into the markets, just above that 4100 area. That was a nice resistance zone. Once we broke that, that was now resistance turning into support, and price has been supported all the way to the upside. We are currently at 4300 at another zone here, which is an interesting area that we are looking to see whether price would actually hold around that zone or sort of get rejected and push back to the downside. My complete ceiling is around 4400 as my call wall, and at 4100 is my absolute support. So I'd love to see what price does within this range. This is the range that I will be involved in with the buying and selling of gold as we progress throughout the week. Again, remember on Wednesday we do have CPI data coming out, so it'd be interesting to see how the markets react off of that data release, because again we can see here that we do have some consolidation after that big rally last week, and that buying pressure coming into the market because of the weakening of the dollar. Oil we've already touched on. In a sense, this would be an area we'd want to see if Iran and the US can get into some good negotiations and find a middle ground to get that agreement off the table or on the table, get that agreement signed. Then we'd love to get involved and see price coming down from this 80, 81, 82 zone down to the 75, 74, 75 area for us to be involved in those sellers and make some money as price corrects towards the downside. If the delay continues, then I'd be expecting to see more consolidation, and if there's failure to actually meet eye to eye or see eye to eye, then I'd be looking for a rally of oil prices maybe towards that 86, 87 zone. Very last is Bitcoin, and for Bitcoin I'll just go to the daily time frame, and as we can see, we broke out of that channel and we have been facing some resistance at that zone. That 65,200 zone, 65,000, 66,000 zone has proven to be a solid resistance area, and we can now see that sellers have stepped into the market, and potentially we might want to now see whether price gives us that continuation to the downside with the resistance playing its part and previous support being broken, potentially targeting this 62,000 level. And again, this would be an area where now I'd maybe start looking for maybe some of those buys, or we'd potentially see a consolidation around this area. That would be my exit point before wanting to get involved again or some more on Bitcoin. Right. With that said, guys, we've come to the end of this video, and again, what we're looking out for this week particularly is CPI news release. If that release comes positive, then we are positive for the dollar. We're looking for the dollar to weaken. If it's negative for the dollar, then we're looking for the weakening of the dollar, and we'd be aligned with proper risk and proper management of our trades to ride that wave towards the end of the week. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do leave me a comment down below if you have any other insight on any other instruments that you might be looking at, or something you might want us to look out in the coming videos. But until then, have a good one. Cheers.